Laird Reeford. I'm the Coastal Initiatives Manager for Sarasota County. And first and foremost, I wanted to welcome all of you here tonight. Thank you so much. I really sincerely thank you for coming out, taking time out of your personal lives. We know that that's a big deal to come out to these kinds of meetings. And the whole intent is to be able to reach out to folks and give you information, make sure that at least the information that you have is solid and accurate, and give you folks a chance then to ask any questions you might have. And we can hopefully, with that kind of a dialogue, we'll be able to get at least as much of an understanding as possible, given the fact that you obviously have ongoing erosion issues on Manasota Key. So before we get going, I wanted to first introduce some of the other staff that's here besides myself. Matt Osterhout is in the back there in the blue shirt, and he's the interim director of Planning and Development Services. And Rachel Herman, who's sitting over at this table here, is the manager of the planning group in the Environmental Protection Division group. But first and foremost, I certainly wanted to recognize our commissioner, Charles Hines, who is here today. And what a testament to his dedication to the community to come here for a public meeting. Given his workload and his busy meeting schedule, it just never ceases to amaze me how dedicated our commissioners are and how lucky we are to have them. So a round of applause for Commissioner Hines. Now, as to the topic for tonight, we're mostly kind of geared tonight just to make sure everyone understands up front. This is not a meeting about the Charlotte County project. I just want to make clear this is our Sarasota County workshop, and there is going to be, many of you have heard, there is going to be a meeting tomorrow scheduled that was organized by some of the local residents in association with the homeowner associations for a meeting that will be at 12 o'clock tomorrow. And one of the central issues at that meeting will be covering the Charlotte County project that will be going forward. We will also, once again, though, be there to offer information, answer questions, that sort of thing from the Sarasota County perspective. But tomorrow's meeting is really going to focus on the Charlotte County effort. Tonight is really geared towards trying to give you information to help with, as you receive the surveys that are coming out, to ask for general support in the community for beach nourishment. We want to make sure that folks have as much of the information and have as many of their questions answered as possible in order to best fill out that survey to send it back in. So that's kind of a little bit about the background for tonight, what we're planning on. Let me see if this gizmo is going to work with the PowerPoint. Yes?
Laird, tomorrow at the 12 o'clock meeting,
yes,
you are going to give us some type of an abbreviated presentation because I know a lot of the people didn't come to this meeting that are coming to tomorrow's one. That's what I understood. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm sure that, I'll be able to give kind of a synopsis of some of the things that we covered tonight.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure. Thank you.
Okay, for tonight, we've done staff introductions and the purpose of the workshop. We're just flying right through this already. This is great. The slides that you're about to see are actually geared off of the frequently asked questions that we put out, because that gives you kind of thumbnail answers to some of the questions that you might have about beach nourishment. So that's going to be the crux of what we're going through today. We're going to be then again reminding you of the dates of upcoming workshops, and this is a good chance to say it first and I'll say it again at the end, but there's going to be 2 more of these workshops sponsored by Sarasota County, and our intent is to provide the exact same information. So folks that couldn't make it here tonight can possibly make those workshops. Those are in January. And of course, you're welcome. I mean, you can go to 2 or 3 of them if you'd like, but you'll be even more bored than you are tonight listening to me, because you're going to hear a lot of the same information and a lot of the same, in fact, should be pretty much the same information that you're going to hear tonight. So that'll be coming up. And then we're going to cover some next steps, and then open it up to questions and answers. Okay, pretty much covered this already, and this is again the context is for the surveys that you have received or will be receiving soon in the mail. So we'll start with covering the information that was on the frequently asked questions. So I think a reasonable first question is, what is beach nourishment? Not everybody really is crystal clear on that. And really, in a nutshell, what beach nourishment is an attempt to bring back sand to a Gulf shoreline, in this case, sandy shoreline, where the sand has eroded away, the sand that was there either before or historically or on an ongoing basis. It's a means by bringing sand that's been carried off of the shoreline back onto the shoreline. And in many cases, the intent is to actually go to where that sand ended up being deposited, taking it back from where it was deposited and placing it on the shoreline. And that's kind of a nutshell description. I wish that that was as easy as that. It's so much easier to say than do. It is a very, very complex and complicated process because of the fact that there are such complex coastal ecosystems that exist on our shoreline. So everything is not quite as cut and dry and simple as you might like to think. So it is a big deal. But that, in essence, is what beach nourishment is. Bringing sand back onto a shoreline where the sand has eroded away. Coastal erosion is where you are, in fact, losing that sand. That can be from anything from storms that pass by that take the sand away in maybe a quicker fashion, but also what a lot of people don't think about is just ongoing wave action, ongoing tidal action that carries sand away. And in a real quick coastal one-on-one, when sand is carried away, it's very interesting. Away can mean miles offshore. Away can mean right out to the immediate nearshore sandbar. Away can mean out into the surf and then carried laterally along the shoreline. And in net, in our area, it travels from north to south. So the sand is in an ever dynamic, changing, and then finally in equilibrium, where the sand will go offshore, come back onshore, it'll be carried downdrift, and some of the sand ends up getting carried all the way out past the nearshore wave energy out into deeper Gulf. And that, by and large, is often the sources that we use for beach nourishment, is to go back out into those deeper waters out in the Gulf, find where that sand has been deposited, and bring it back on the shore. Coastal accretion. Essentially the same energy, the same forces that act on the shoreline can not just take sand away. In some cases, they can push sand back up on the shoreline. And what we have here is a graphic that kind of depicts this. This is a 2010 aerial of a portion of Siesta Key. If you'll note the current shoreline kind of highlighted with that blue line. And if we do the next slide, you'll see that in 6 years, incredible change occurred there in that portion of the shoreline. Whereas, strictly speaking, this portion here that you see actually eroded somewhat, but this part of the shoreline was a tremendous accretion. Look at the addition of that sand. Not only addition, but then the growth of dune vegetation, the buildup of enough elevation to create dunes. And so that is accretion. And that's what homeowners along the barrier islands would love to see, accretion. Generally hate to see the erosion, love to see the accretion. Because accretion then means that your shoreline is being pushed back out. Okay, nourishment sand. Where does it come from? Well, each project is unique and it's different. The traditional, though, ongoing beach nourishment has generally looked at what I was starting to discuss before, which are those offshore deposits of sand and bringing them back on the shoreline. Now, this is one of the important points I really love to cover, because there are people that have some misconceptions when they see some of the ocean-going rigs that are out as part of beach nourishment projects. A lot of people really believe that these dredges are going out, especially even near shore, and actually digging holes in the Gulf bottom, in the floor of the Gulf. And folks, I can tell you, not only does that not happen, but that would be completely, totally illegal. We would have folks going to jail if we went out and started digging up the floor of the Gulf of Mexico. It just doesn't happen. What we do go out for to try to find sand is to find those underwater mounds of sand that have been deposited. When I say mounds, some of them are huge, because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for sand that is the right quality, the right grain size, the right color, and in enough quantity in these great big huge mountainous mounds where that sand can then be harvested by these seagoing vessels. And what they are, they're called hopper dredges. And what they do is they literally go out to these areas that we have found. Our last project on Siesta, we went out about 10 miles offshore to find suitable sand for the project. These ships go out, they lower pipes that go that almost like giant straws. They actually suck the sand in a water sand slurry, and it goes into the hold of the ship. They pump this sand into the hold. They then, their giant ship then comes in filled with sand slurry, and they go to a point that is about roughly half a mile or so offshore to a pumping area that we've already set up and established. They hook up their pipes to this pumping area, and they unload the sand and slurry from the hold of the ship. That then gets pumped onto the shoreline, and that any of you that have had an opportunity, is actually fairly interesting, believe it or not, but if you've seen a beach nourishment project in process, you'll see the pipeline, the end of the pipe, which then sequentially moves down the shoreline as they fill the beach. And the sand slurry comes out in this big gush. We have a picture you'll be able to see in a minute here, something that will give you an idea. It's not a real close picture, but it comes out in a big gush, and then there are construction equipment on the shoreline that then shapes it as it comes out. The sand slurry hits the shoreline, the water recedes back into the Gulf, the sand is left, and then it's shaped at what is the design elevation and slope and so forth. So then you build your beach. Now there's other alternative sources of sand, one of which Longboat Key recently used, and that was a truck haul. Now that's a fairly recent thing, and the reason why it's only very recent is because until recently, it was not cost effective. It made no sense cost-wise, because far and away, the least expensive way of getting the volume of sand you need for beach nourishment and bringing it to a shoreline was to go to these offshore deposits and bring them on shore and pump them on the shoreline. What's happened is that with the recent Superstorm Sandy and a number of other issues that have occurred, the very few of these ocean-going vessels that can go out and collect the sand have remained kind of the same, so we've got the same supply, but demand has gone way up. So it's almost economics 101. The cost of beach nourishment has skyrocketed. If I can, just for an illustration, we did our first beach nourishment on Siesta Key that finished in 2007. And that had a total price on the project of about $11 million. We just did the first renourishment of that project that just finished this past year. It was nearly $22 million, double the price in just this handful of years for beach nourishment. What that means is, that's bad news for any of us who are doing coastal management, because it means now we got to find more funding sources, greater funding sources to support beach nourishment. But the other thing that's happened is it has opened up the door to some other alternative sources of sand, like truck hauls. And what used to be really by trucking the cavalcade, the parade of dump trucks that would be needed to bring that much sand onto a shoreline was prohibitively expensive. Now, with the rising costs of beach nourishment in the more traditional ways, is looking better and more realistic. So that's something that at least is a feasible alternative, depending on the area. I mean, again, it has to be roads that could support that kind of traffic. It would have to be considering the nuisance effect of having this constant parade of dump trucks in a barrier island, all that sort of thing, as you can imagine. But this is a picture that really is more of the traditional beach nourishment. What you can't see real clearly from this photo, and I kind of wish I had put a different photo to show you up closer, but this is the plume of the sand slurry that's being shot out the end of the pipe that's coming out on the shoreline. And here's your construction equipment, your dozers and front end loaders and so forth that are pushing the sand and shaping as it comes out. Okay, who owns the new sand? I want to first give kudos to Rachel Herman, who developed this graphic, because this is what you're about to see is probably the best and simplest way I have ever seen to quickly and graphically explain to you the ownership of the sand. And I think this is a really, really good graphic. What you have, beach nourishment, got your house, got your shoreline, you have an eroded situation where it's very close to the house. Here's your mean high water line. What happens is with a beach nourishment project, the state of Florida, shortly before the sand is pumped, they go out and they set the current mean high water line, which, as you can see from this graphic, is right there. You've got sandy beach, wet sandy beach here. When the tide is out, this will be exposed, and this is wet sandy beach. When the tide is in, so that's your mean high water, it's going to be wet or submerged. Here's your dry sandy beach, right there. But this is the mean high water line. Now, beach nourishment. Boy, I wish it was that easy to actually nourish the beach. I would be pressing that button left and right, let me tell you. Anyway, okay, same location. Here's your mean high, the former mean high water line before the construction, before the sand was pumped. Same place, same location, hasn't moved. Still, now dry sandy beach, but note, you now have a new mean high water line out here. This was the old mean high water line, but now is called the ECL, the erosion control line. Hasn't moved. This area here, you remember how the shoreline went down. This is sand that was placed as part of the beach nourishment that now went beyond the ECL in order to have that continuous slope of sand. So this is sand that now is owned by the property owner. We still have the situation just like before beach nourishment. Everything this side of the line, at that time it was the mean high water line, owned by the property owner. But now everything, same as before, seaward of that line is now public. Difference being that that area seaward of that line is no longer water. It's now sand that's been paid for as part of the beach nourishment project. So the difference is this is still owned by the property owner, plus with the bonus of the extra sand that was placed. This to the seaward side of that same line is public domain. And that's pretty much the clearest way I've ever seen this depicted as being private and public ownership. Yes, sir.
Does the assessment of the cost take into account the erosion control? NCSDP.
The assessment of the cost did not take. What it took account of was the benefit that was accrued to the property. So in other words, the amount that was assessed for each homeowner can never be by law more than the benefit that they are seen to receive as part of the project.
I know it can't be more, but it could, I'm thinking it could be less depending upon where that erosion control line is. Because in that example, the erosion control line was almost where the new mean high water line would be. That's a different situation than you showed initially. So why wouldn't that be also be reflective of what was involved?
Well, what would happen there, if you're saying this now would become the private ownership?
No, I'm saying if in the example, the mean water line was halfway between what you're showing there now.
Uh-huh.
That cost for that particular homeowner would be different than someone else's cost.
Well, it was, you know, again, each time we do a project, and I think we're going to have a slide on this as well, but that whole, the funding assessment and the funding split is absolutely determined case by case in terms of project by project, and it is established, really quite frankly, it's established on the basis of trying to gain the greatest possible equity.
But it never does reflect the erosion control line.
Well, there really isn't. I mean, your erosion control line is exactly where your mean high water line was before. So the homeowner has really, in terms of ownership, has not gained or lost anything. Because before the beach nourishment, the homeowner owned to that line. That was mean high water. Well, after the nourishment, the homeowner still owns to that line. So that's really the attempt by the state of Florida. The difference being that now, what ends up being created, there is some dry sandy beach that is then owned by the public. But then again, in most beach nourishment projects, the public ends up paying the lion's share of the total cost as well.
Before you move on, I think the gentleman's question was that if you have, let's deal in hundreds of yards. So if you had 100 yards of renourishment and the erosion control line started there, and 80 of that 100 yards went beyond where we call the public beach, and 20% of that went behind the line towards the owner. I think he was looking at the cost of, depending on where that erosion control line is, how is it's, you know, how much of the cost is borne by the public versus the benefit to the homeowner. I think that was his point.
That was what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I don't know if that came across, but that's...
Well, I guess I'm not sure if I'm depicting this well enough, but because it is set at the mean high water line, that is the line that the owner owns to before nourishment ever happens.
So it doesn't vary then by property?
Correct.
Because the mean high water line is the mean high water line.
Exactly.
Everybody's property, so therefore the erosion control line is not gaining any for the public or losing any.
Correct. That's exactly it. That is exactly the point. Yes, David.
So Larry, mean high water line today is set over a number of years that it goes over. And if you have accretion and you have erosion over a number of years, your mean high water line today may in fact be 20 or 30 feet out into the water. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that is correct, exactly.
So if you set the erosion control line at today's mean high water line versus what your property today is, which may go 20 feet into the water, you are essentially resetting the mean high water line for your property to a new place, and your ownership now goes to the erosion control line as opposed to a 20-year or 15-year or 10-year average of what the mean high water line is. So there is a case where some property, if you go with the with renourishment now, any benefit you would have gotten from accretion in the next 10 years will have been lost.
That is exactly right, and that is the trade-off. If people, that is the trade-off. If people are wanting to have their shoreline nourished, which again, lion's share paid by public taxes, but that does stop that movement of the mean high water line. Whereas before you could argue, if the sand was simply coming and going without nourishment, that mean high water line, if it was accreting during a time of accretion, is going to move out this way. However, if it continues eroding, it's going to move this way. So that's the trade-off. If a homeowner wants to have, or all the homeowners in a community want to have beach nourishment, then you're no longer going to have that movement of the mean high water line in terms of property ownership. However, what you are getting is storm protection, and you're getting a greater property value. We're going to go over that in a second as well. So that's the trade-off. Yes, Michael.
Mean high water line, if you look at it as a high tide now, it varies a lot. So how does the state determine what the mean high water line is right now? Does it go out and take your highest tide and draw it there? Or is it
No, actually, the attempt is to get what, for lack of a better word, the average mean high water line, if you will.
So it's the average high tide line?
They try to capture as much as possible because it is a snapshot in time. You're absolutely right about that. There aren't calculations that are run that say, okay, mean high water line 2 years ago was here and it's here today, and so we're going to extrapolate. That's not done. What is done, though, and it's a very dynamic system. It is, no doubt about it. The attempt, though, is to not go like on the highest tide and run out there and go, okay, mean high, here we go. Here's mean high water line because we're going to gain more property for the public. They don't do that. They really try to go on what would be a typical day, something that reflects your conditions recently. And of course, if you've got a steadily eroding shoreline, you probably, as a homeowner, you want them to get out there as soon as possible to set the line. Because if, in most cases, if you're going for beach nourishment, your shoreline is eroding away and it's probably heading back towards the house, receding. So you really want them to set that, when they possibly can, because the longer you wait, then, you're going to lose more shoreline. But anyway, this at least makes it fairly clear as to how it works and what ends up happening with private and public ownership. And I thought this did a really good job of depicting that. Yes, sir.
When you say that the general public will assume the lion's share of the cost of this.
Meaning public tax dollars.
Right. Now, give me an example or an approximation of what percentage you're referring to.
I hate to lay out numbers because of the fact that every single project is different. I can just tell you as just one example, for the South Siesta Key project, the percentage ended up being on the order of 55% TDT, and actually it was just shy of 50% tourist development tax. And then we're still waiting to see how much we're going to be eligible for state funding. And then the homeowners ended up paying, in that case, something on the order of 20% or so, give or take, of the total cost in the project area. But that can vastly change. I just want to make sure people understand that is not the percentage set by anybody. There's a policy decision that's made for each project. It's based on equity. It's based on public access. It's based on how many, if you have a beach park there, if you have mostly single-family homes, if you have condominiums. There's a whole host of issues that can occur that will vastly change those percentages.
I know it's a ballpark number, 80-20, that you're throwing out, but what was the erosion in Siesta Key ballpark? what were they dealing with? How many feet shoreline did they actually lose? What, you measure it in cubic yards? How do you measure it?
Well, the best way to measure that is relative to the infrastructure that was behind the beach. And in that case, what we saw was tremendous impacts on the public beach, on Turtle Beach, in terms of vastly narrowing the beach itself, and became very much more sloped, very much steeper in the shoreline. And then in the areas that contain private properties, we had single-family homes where the waves were crashing against the foundation of the house. We had shorelines where vegetation was dropping off into the Gulf. Swimming pools were becoming undermined.
How do you measure it? In feet or cubic yards, or how do you measure?
You can measure it different ways. Yeah, you can feet.
What was the loss in Siesta Key that developed this 80-20 relationship? I mean, was it a 40-foot erosion on everyone's property?
Oh, no, the shoreline receded more than that. It was, some of the areas receded up to 100 feet from where they were. Yes, sir.
If the homeowners have paid 20%, should the ECL line not move 20% towards the sea?
Well, interesting. I mean, I guess the public taxpayers would say, shouldn't it move then 80% this way? I mean, the point is, it was set at the mean high water line, and the effort there is so that the private owner doesn't lose or gain property at the time of the beach nourishment.
But having said that, your mean high water line is after the erosion has taken place, so
True, but then so is the nourishment.
that as well.
Yeah, and that's, that's the thing. If you have enough confidence that that shoreline is going to return, then the smartest thing would be not to do beach nourishment. Yes, Charles.
When Siesta Key did their questionnaire and trying to determine how much, whether the community is going to support, renourishment, do they have a cost percentage of what would this cost? 20%, 15%? When you were filling out this questionnaire, it sort of,
Well, there was
missing a piece.
There was a huge difference on Siesta Key, because unlike Manasota Key, where as you go along the shoreline of the entire barrier island, you have undulating shoreline. You have erosional shorelines, you've got accreting shorelines, so you have alternating badly eroded and threatened and fat and happy. And as it goes along the key, you end up then with a situation where you've got what, for lack of better terminology, the fat and happy people have no use for beach nourishment because their shoreline is fine, at least for now. And then the people who are experiencing the serious threat, they are clamoring for beach nourishment because they're feeling threatened and uncomfortable, naturally so. They're concerned about what's going to happen to their homes. And what we've seen, actually, even on Manasota Key, in certain areas where at one time there were areas up much further north that were really in the hot box, that were in serious erosion, looked like we were about to lose some homes, and lo and behold, that pattern just shifted, and what was accreting updrift north began to move to the south. And the folks that were in the worst erosional condition suddenly saw their shoreline returning and getting out wider and wider and wider. And there was now a whole new group of people who were suddenly in the hot box, and those who formerly were clamoring for a project were now kind of, well, I guess we're okay. And the point I'm trying to make is, with Siesta Key, that was not at all the case. Siesta Key has a totally different situation. They have a land feature called Point of Rocks, which is just to the north of them. And it is significant, it is unique, it is amazing, but it also is a barrier to sand movement. And what happens is that the normal flow of sand from north to south gets to Point of Rocks and virtually can't get past that point. So everything south of that, you don't have this undulating shoreline, you've got erosion and nothing but. So we had a near unanimous support on South Siesta Key for beach nourishment. The entire stretch from Point of Rocks all the way down to the southernmost home, all clamoring for beach nourishment. Totally different. Just over 2 miles.
So it's really relatively short compared to all of Minnesota.
Oh, compared to all of Minnesota Key, yes.
Yeah, so when I think about this, you take a section, there's 2 miles, pretty eroded on Siesta Key. Shouldn't we sort of break up Minnesota Key in the way where there's critical erosion versus non-critical?
Oh, absolutely.
And because you may have a case for having a renourishment project for the critical, more critical erosion versus where you have the accretion. And then the cases, I'm thinking about this as the key scenario you spoke about. You have these rocks which cause this at Siesta Key. Now when you take a look at Blind Pass Park, you can go to the north of Blind Pass Park and you can see the huge rocks that come out of the water that have no beaches. And that's the same scenario when you look at that as what you see with Siesta Key. So maybe there's some thought process that we should think about as it relates to the existing conditions of rocks on Minnesota Key and not look at the total key as such, since it encompasses so many miles.
No, you make a very astute point, Charles, and the point is that, I guess, my point was at least partially lost in that I was describing what has happened along the entire Minnesota Key shoreline, but make no mistake, I don't think we'd ever consider a project for the entire key.
Right.
But even for those segments you're talking about, in order to get a segment that is long enough to make it a worthwhile, let's say, in terms of sustainability, you'd have to have a minimum 2-mile stretch. Even that, historically, for Minnesota Key, there hasn't been real extended periods of time where one section has remained either just erosional or just accretional. So that's why we are trying to capture in the survey with the addresses. We're going to be doing exactly the analysis you're suggesting.
Okay, good.
We are going to be doing exactly looking at the responses that we get relative to where folks are located on the key. Because otherwise, it really, the information wouldn't do us much good, because you'd still get the fat and happy people saying no beach nourishment and the badly eroded people saying yes, beach nourishment. This way we'll be able to correlate, you know, what answers are we getting depending on where we are physically on the key.
Yeah, and to that point, if you look at Blind Pass Park, for